My name is Sam, and I'm a husband, a dad, and, until recently, a proud family man. I never thought I'd be here, but I need some advice or maybe just a place to pour all this out. This story isn't something I ever imagined sharing, but here I am. I work 2 jobs. Yeah, 2. It's exhausting, and most days I come home barely able to keep my eyes open, but I do it for my family. For Laura, my wife, and for our daughter, who's everything to me. Every time I get tired or wonder why I'm putting in all these hours, I just think about my girl's future, about giving her everything I never had. Laura and I agreed I'd work more, and she'd handle things at home. She's the one who takes care of our daughter's dreams, especially her love for singing. Laura even found her a vocal coach, Eric, a young guy with a good reputation. She said he was great with our daughter, and I trusted her judgment. It's a good life, or at least I thought it was. So, things were good for a while, but over the last few months, I started noticing changes in Laura. At first, it was small stuff you could brush off as normal if you weren't paying close attention. She was on her phone a lot more, texting and smiling at the screen in a way that felt off. She got distant too, like she was miles away even when she was sitting right next to me. Our conversations became short, almost tense, as if she had somewhere else she'd rather be. I try not to read too much into it. I thought maybe she was just stressed. Maybe it was the routine wearing her down. But things kept piling up. She started going out more, saying she needed to run errands or go for a break. And she started acting strange when I'd ask her about her day, giving me these vague answers that left me feeling more confused than anything else. One day, I came home early from my second job. I was exhausted, but I'd finished a big project and thought maybe I'd surprise Laura and our daughter. I walked in, and there they were, Laura, our daughter, and Eric, the vocal coach. At first, everything looked innocent enough. They were sitting together in the living room, laughing over something. But as I watched, something didn't sit right. Laura and Eric looked too comfortable. They shared these looks, these lingering glances, like they had some inside joke. That moment stuck with me. I couldn't shake it. No matter how hard I tried to tell myself, I was imagining things. I mean, what husband wants to believe his wife would do something like that? I tried to shrug it off, but over the next few weeks, the signs kept popping up and they were getting harder to ignore. Laura started dressing up more, even when she was just taking our daughter to her lesson. She'd spend more time than usual in front of the mirror, putting on makeup, fixing her hair in ways I hadn't seen her do in years. When I asked her about it, she brushed it off, saying she just wanted to feel good or that she was trying to set a good example for our daughter. The phone was another thing. She'd be glued to it, and if I even glanced in her direction, she'd angle the screen away or end the conversation with a quick swipe. I'd ask her who she was texting, and she'd come up with some excuse. Oh, just my friend Rachel, or I'm checking in with my mom. But there was this instinct kicking up in me, this little voice whispering that things didn't add up. I knew I needed to do something to know the truth, but I was terrified. If I was right, it would change everything. If I was wrong, well, what kind of husband doubts his wife for no reason? But doubt was eating me alive, so I finally decided to do a little investigating on my own. One night, after Laura had gone to bed, I found myself staring at her phone, sitting on the kitchen counter. It was right there, and for a moment I battled with myself, debating if I should look or if I should just leave it alone and trust her. But trust wasn't enough anymore. I needed to know. With my heart pounding, I picked up the phone. But of course, she put a password on it. That was strange in itself. Laura had never been one for phone locks, and the fact that she had one now felt like a slap in the face. I put the phone back down, feeling sick. I was angry and embarrassed and hurt, all at once. But that wasn't the only thing I could check. I remembered that Laura had linked her phone to our laptop months back when she was setting up some apps. I went to the laptop, opened it up, and sure enough, I found her messages synced. Most of them were ordinary, chats with friends, a few group texts. But then I saw a message thread with a contact simply labeled E. My heart dropped. I clicked on it, and there it was, dozens of messages between Laura and Eric. They were careful with their words, never saying anything outright, but the tone was unmistakable. There were jokes, little comments about meeting up, and one message where Eric told her, "Can't wait to see you again." And Laura replied, "Soon, I hope. I miss you." I just sat there, staring at the screen, feeling my whole world crumble. I'd given her everything, worked myself into the ground for our family, trusted her with all I had. And here she was sneaking around behind my back. I couldn't sleep that night. I lay there, wide awake, listening to Laura's steady breathing beside me, feeling completely alone. I wanted to shake her awake, to confront her right then and there, but I couldn't. I felt paralyzed, stunned by the betrayal, and too shattered to face it head on. The next day, I went through my workday like a zombie. I showed up, did what I had to do, and pretended everything was normal, but inside, I was unraveling. I kept seeing those messages between Laura and Eric flash in my mind, her words and the way they seemed to be sharing something I was completely shut out from. Finally, when I got home that night, I couldn't keep up the act. I tried to talk to Laura, but the words just wouldn't come out right. I stammered, saying something about feeling distant, about noticing her spending more time with Eric. She laughed it off, saying, "You're being silly, Sam. Eric's just a vocal coach. You know that." Her lie felt like a slap. She didn't even flinch, didn't hesitate as she brushed me off like I was some paranoid fool. The ease with which she lied to my face made me feel like a stranger in my own home. It was in that moment that I knew I had to find out the full truth. I wasn't going to let this slide. Not this time. The next few days, I watched Laura more closely than ever. I didn't want to admit I was spying on my own wife, but that's what it had come to. I started noticing more. She'd go to her errands dressed up, checking her phone constantly, and smiling at texts she'd delete as soon as she read them. Sometimes she'd come home with her hair a little too tousled, or her lipstick smudged in a way that looked like more than just a regular day out. One night, I told Laura I'd be working late and slipped out early instead. I parked down the street, watching the house, and after about an hour, Eric's car pulled up. He didn't even try to be discreet. He just walked right up to the front door and let himself in. That felt like a punch to the gut. He knew he had free access to my home. It was like he was mocking me, walking in like he owned the place. I waited in my car, fighting the urge to storm in and confront them. But I held back, wanting to catch them in the act. After a while, the lights went out in the living room, and I felt my stomach turn. I knew what was happening inside. My mind was racing, a mix of anger and heartbreak that I'd never felt before. I stayed out there for hours, my whole life flashing in front of me, knowing things would never be the same. When Eric finally left, I knew I couldn't ignore it anymore. This wasn't a suspicion or a hunch, it was real. Laura was cheating on me, right in our own home. I didn't wait long to confront her after that night. I couldn't. Holding it in was eating me alive, and I needed to hear her admit it, even though I knew it would tear me apart. So, the next morning, while our daughter was at school, I took a deep breath and went to find her in the kitchen. "Laura," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "we need to talk." She glanced up, barely giving me a second look, as if nothing had changed. "Sure, what's up?" I felt my anger bubbling up, but I kept calm. "I know about you and Eric. I know you've been seeing him behind my back." For a split second, there was this flash of panic in her eyes. But then, just like that, she composed herself, letting out a dismissive laugh. "Sam, that's ridiculous. Eric is our daughter's vocal coach. I don't know what you think you saw, but it's nothing." It was the same lie, the same careless shrug that had become her answer to everything lately. But I wasn't buying it this time. "Stop lying to me, Laura. I saw him here last night. I watched him walk right into our home like he belonged here," I said, my voice shaking with barely contained rage. She stared at me, her expression hardening. "So you're spying on me now? That's what this has come to. Don't turn this around on me," I snapped, feeling my heart shatter as I said it. "I wouldn't have to spy if you were honest. How long has this been going on?" She looked at me with this cold, almost defiant look and shrugged. "Fine. You want to know the truth? Yeah, I've been seeing Eric. But don't act so surprised, Sam. You're never here. You're always working, always running off to your 2 jobs, leaving me here alone. What did you think would happen?" I felt like I'd been hit by a truck. The audacity of her blaming me, as if my working to support our family somehow justified her betrayal. "I work so you and our daughter can have a good life. Everything I've done, I've done for you too." She crossed her arms, looking more irritated than remorseful. "Well, maybe if you'd spent more time at home instead of trying to be some kind of hero provider, we wouldn't be in this situation." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. There was no guilt, no apology, just excuses and anger. I felt something snap inside me, and I knew right then that whatever weed had was gone. After that confrontation, things got ugly fast. Laura and I barely spoke to each other, except to argue or exchange the coldest, most indifferent words possible. She didn't try to apologize, didn't even seem to care that I knew. I was nothing more than an obstacle to her now, something in the way of her and her new life with Eric. I tried to figure out my next move, how to handle this for the sake of our daughter. But as the days went by, I started noticing something even more disturbing. Laura began dropping hints about life insurance, about how things would be easier if we had more money. At first, I brushed it off, thinking maybe I was reading too much into it. But then she brought it up more directly, asking me one night, "Have you ever thought about that big insurance policy you took out for us?" I stared at her, feeling my stomach twist. "What about it?" She shrugged casually. "I just mean it's a good thing you thought of us, Sam. I mean, with everything that could happen in life, accidents, illnesses, it's comforting to know that we're taken care of, you know?" That cold, calculating tone in her voice sent a chill down my spine. It wasn't just about the cheating anymore. She and Eric were planning something that could leave me out of the picture permanently. I didn't know if I was being paranoid, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was in real danger. That night, I lay in bed, staring up at the ceiling, trying to process what I just realized. It wasn't just that Laura had betrayed me. It was that she was willing to go to lengths I'd never even considered. That idea of accidents she kept alluding to, it started to make sense in the most twisted way. She knew about the insurance policy I'd taken out years ago, back when I wanted to ensure our family would be secure no matter what. But now it was dawning on me that she saw that policy as her ticket out, as the golden path to a life with Eric, free from me. I started replaying things in my head. Her sudden interest in money, her casual talk of accidents, even the way she looked at me now, as if I was nothing more than a piece on a board she was already playing. I didn't know if Eric was in on it, but deep down, I had a gut feeling that he was. I couldn't believe I'd once trusted this man to mentor my daughter, to be part of her passion. Now he was part of the darkest plot I'd ever encountered. For the next few days, I kept to myself, watching, observing, careful not to let Laura know I was onto her. But the more I saw, the more my suspicions grew. Eric started showing up more, sometimes even when I was home, as if daring me to say something. Laura, meanwhile, seemed more irritated with my presence, more eager to push me away. I was walking on eggshells, feeling as if every moment in that house could be my last. I knew I couldn't stay quiet forever, so I started taking precautions. I told a close friend a little about what was going on, just enough so someone else knew something was off in case things went south. I documented everything, writing down dates, times, and strange conversations, keeping a record in case I ever needed it. Then came the night I'll never forget. We'd been invited to a small gathering at a mutual friend's place. Laura insisted we go, even though we hadn't gone anywhere together in weeks. The way she pushed for it made me suspicious, but I went along with it, thinking maybe I'd get some insight into what she was planning. The party was normal at first, drinks, laughter, casual conversation. But as the night went on, I noticed Laura and Eric's sneaking glances, huddling together in whispered conversations that ended abruptly whenever I walked by. I felt my skin crawl, a sense of dread creeping over me as I realized this was more than just an ordinary gathering. Then, suddenly, Laura came up to me, smiling sweetly, and asked if I could help her bring in some items from the car. It felt staged, but I followed her out, bracing myself. As we walked down the steps outside, I heard someone call my name from behind, and as I turned, I felt a hard shove from Laura. I stumbled, caught off guard, and felt my foot slip. I was about to fall down the steep concrete steps when I managed to grab onto the railing, just in time. I caught myself, but I'd seen the look in her eyes before she pushed me. There was no doubt about it. That was intentional. She wanted me to fall, to tumble down those stairs. I stood there, heart pounding, looking up at her in shock. But Laura just looked back with a calm, almost bored expression. "You need to be more careful, Sam," she said without an ounce of emotion. "People can get hurt in an instant." That was it. I couldn't stay in that house another night. Not with her and Eric plotting my accidental demise. That night, after we returned from the party, I knew I couldn't let my guard down for a second. Laura's attempt to push me down the stairs had crossed a line I couldn't ignore. As soon as she was asleep, I quietly packed a bag, grabbed all the documents I collected, and slipped out of the house. I drove to a hotel, my mind racing with the reality of what my life had become. I was hiding from my own wife, a woman I had once trusted more than anyone. The next morning, I decided it was time to take action. I went straight to a lawyer, explaining the situation and showing him the records I had been keeping. He looked at me with a mix of shock and concern as I detailed everything: the affair, the suspicious comments about the life insurance, the accident at the party. He told me to start gathering even more evidence and suggested I stay somewhere safe, at least until things could be legally sorted out. I called out sick from work and spent the next few days digging deeper. I checked our shared bank accounts, our credit card statements, anything that might show evidence of Laura's betrayal and plotting. Sure enough, I found several large, unexplained charges: dinners, hotel rooms, gifts, all lined up with dates and times I knew I was working. It was infuriating, but also oddly validating, to see proof of what I'd suspected. I knew I needed more, so I bought a small recording device, and when I finally went back to the house, I carefully placed it in spots where I knew Laura and Eric might talk. I needed her words, her admission, something concrete to prove the extent of her intentions. With the recording device in place, I returned to the hotel, my nerves on edge. I couldn't go back to the house regularly without raising suspicion, so I left the device for a couple of days, praying I'd catch something useful. When I finally returned to retrieve it, my hands were shaking as I hit play, hoping for any scrap of proof. It was all there. I could hear Laura's voice, low and calm, talking to Eric as if they were discussing nothing more than weekend plans. But what they were talking about was me. She mentioned the insurance money again, laughing as she called it her ticket to freedom. Eric made some comment about making sure Sam won't be around much longer, to which Laura replied, "Just a little patience. Accidents happen all the time." Hearing their voices made my skin crawl. These were people I had welcomed into my life, my home. Laura, the woman I had promised to love and cherish, was plotting my death. I played the recording over and over, feeling sick each time, but knowing it was exactly what I needed. This was my proof, something I could take to the authorities, something that would protect me from whatever they had planned next. With the recording as evidence, I immediately went back to my lawyer, who helped me file for an emergency protective order. He also recommended I contact the police, given the clear threat to my life. I handed over the recordings, explaining everything I had discovered. The officers looked at me in disbelief at first, but once they listened to the recording, their expressions changed. They understood the seriousness of the situation. The authorities told me to stay away from the house for my own safety and assured me they would handle things from there. It was a terrifying relief, knowing I was in safe hands, but I still felt the weight of everything I'd lost pressing down on me. The police moved quickly after hearing the recordings. They arranged a plan to confront Laura and Eric, to get them talking under surveillance and confirm their intentions firsthand. I was anxious, wondering if they'd try to slip out of it, deny everything, or somehow talk their way out of it. But the recordings had been explicit enough that they didn't stand much of a chance. A few days later, I got a call from one of the officers. They brought both Laura and Eric in for questioning. The officer explained how they'd separated them, asking each of them questions that put pressure on their stories. It didn't take long. Laura cracked first, her calm demeanor slipping as she tried to cover up her actions. But the more she talked, the worse it got. Her story didn't add up, and Eric's responses only dug their hole deeper. Eventually, he turned on her, blaming her for the entire plan, saying she'd been the mastermind. I thought I'd feel some satisfaction in that moment, knowing they'd been caught. But all I felt was a strange, hollow emptiness. This woman, the mother of my child, the person I'd loved and trusted, had plotted to end my life, and now she was sitting in a police station, exposed for what she'd done. The officer told me that with the evidence and the confessions, charges were being filed for attempted murder and conspiracy. Eric was looking at a long sentence, and Laura, I could barely process it. The mother of my child was going to prison. Part of me felt crushed, while another part felt a kind of relief. A release from a nightmare I hadn't seen coming. When the reality hit that Laura and Eric were both facing prison time, I had to confront the fact that my life and my daughter's life would never be the same. I went back to the house alone, standing in the silent rooms that once held memories of love and family. Everything felt tainted, as if betrayal had seeped into the walls. I wandered from room to room, not even sure what I was looking for, just feeling the weight of it all. That night, I told my daughter what little I could. I kept it simple, explaining that her mom had done something very wrong and wouldn't be around for a while. She was too young to understand fully, but I could see the confusion and sadness in her eyes. How do you explain to a child that her mother tried to hurt her father? How do you break a family apart without breaking her heart in the process? I reached out to a counselor for her, hoping it might help her navigate this confusion. As for me, I didn't even know where to begin. I'd lost my wife, my sense of security, and even my own home felt foreign now. Friends and family came around, rallying to support me. Some offered to take my daughter for a few days. Others offered their homes if I needed to get away. I felt grateful, but also alone in a way I'd never felt before. The betrayal had left scars that no amount of support could instantly heal. As the days went by, I found myself caught in a whirlwind of legal proceedings. The police had gathered enough evidence to charge Laura and Eric, but now came the process of ensuring they faced the consequences. My lawyer guided me through everything, explaining that Laura was facing serious charges that could result in a lengthy prison sentence. Eric, too, would be held accountable, though his legal team was trying to spin a narrative that he was just following Laura's lead, as if that excused his role in their plan. Court dates were set, and I knew I'd have to testify. My lawyer warned me that Laura's defense might try to paint me in a negative light, claiming that I'd been absent or emotionally neglectful due to my long work hours. It was infuriating. The very work I did to support my family was now being twisted against me. But I knew the truth, and I was ready to face whatever they threw at me. Throughout this process, I kept my focus on my daughter. She was the reason I got up every morning, the reason I pushed through the pain and anger. I'd look at her and feel this overwhelming need to protect her from all of it. I didn't want her to grow up haunted by what her mother had done, but I also couldn't ignore the reality we were facing. In quieter moments, when I was alone, the sadness would creep in. I'd think back to the early days with Laura, before any of this nightmare had even crossed my mind. It felt like mourning a person who had died, though she was very much alive. The woman I had loved was gone, replaced by someone I barely recognized, someone capable of plotting to destroy everything we had built together. I focused on building a case, on documenting every detail, every piece of evidence that would ensure justice was served. I was doing this for myself, but mostly I was doing it for my daughter. She deserved a safe and stable life, one where she didn't have to look over her shoulder or wonder about the people closest to her. The day of the trial came faster than I expected. Walking into that courtroom felt surreal, as if I were watching someone else's life play out. I took my seat, gripping the arms of my chair, feeling a knot of dread settle deep in my stomach. I tried to prepare myself for seeing Laura and Eric again, but when they were brought in, it hit me harder than I'd anticipated. Laura barely looked at me, her face a mix of resentment and defiance, while Eric avoided eye contact altogether. The prosecution laid out the case with precision, presenting the recordings I had gathered, the text messages, and the financial records of her secret expenses with Eric. Each piece of evidence was a knife twist, driving home the truth of what I'd been through. I felt anger rise in me, hearing their private conversations played aloud, but I kept myself together, knowing I had to stay strong. Then came my turn to testify. I stood up, told my story, detailing the events leading up to my discovery of the affair, the life insurance plot, and the accident attempt at the party. I spoke about the betrayal, about my dedication to our family, and how I'd been willing to do anything to support Laura and our daughter. only to have her turn against me in the most horrifying way. I could see some of the jurors watching me, nodding, their expressions filled with sympathy. But the defense came in hard. They tried to paint me as an inattentive husband, using my long work hours as a reason Laura had sought companionship elsewhere. They twisted everything, making it sound like I'd somehow driven her to this. It stung, hearing them blame me for the very sacrifices I'd made for our family. When Laura took the stand, she played the part perfectly, claiming she'd made mistakes but that she'd never intended to harm me. She insisted the accidents were just dark humor between her and Eric, that they'd never seriously planned anything. I wanted to shout, to ask how she could look me in the eye and lie so easily. But I kept my composure, knowing the evidence was on my side. After what felt like an eternity, the closing statements were made, and we waited for the verdict. I sat there, holding my breath, hoping that the truth would shine through the defense's twisted narrative. The jury deliberated for hours, though it felt like days. I waited outside the courtroom, my nerves on edge, my mind racing through everything that had brought me here. Friends and family sat with me, trying to reassure me, but I could barely hear them. All I could think about was what this verdict would mean for me and my daughter. Justice felt like the only path to closure, the only way I could begin to rebuild my life. Finally, the courtroom doors opened, and we were called back in. I took my seat, my heart pounding as the judge read the verdict. I held my breath, watching Laura and Eric, who both looked tense for the first time. Gone were the calm, mocking expressions they'd worn throughout the trial. The jury found them guilty on all counts: conspiracy to commit murder and attempted murder. I felt a rush of relief, like a weight being lifted off my chest, though it was mixed with a hollow sadness. Justice had been served, but the damage they'd done could never truly be undone. The sentences were severe, ensuring they'd both spend a long time behind bars. For the first time in months, I felt safe, knowing they couldn't hurt me or my daughter anymore. Laura didn't look at me as they led her away. She kept her gaze fixed on the floor, her expression blank. Eric looked broken, his face pale and eyes empty. They were getting what they deserved, but the reality of it was still crushing. I'd loved this woman once, built a life with her, and now that life was gone, shattered beyond repair. After the trial, friends and family surrounded me, offering their support and relief. I felt their comfort, but I also felt a strange, lingering emptiness. I was free from Laura and Eric, but it was a bittersweet freedom, one tainted by betrayal and loss. I thanked everyone who stood by me, but inside, I knew I had a long journey ahead to truly heal. The days after the verdict felt like stepping into an entirely new life, one that was both liberating and overwhelmingly empty. My home, the place I had worked so hard to provide for, felt haunted by memories of what had been and what could have been. I spent hours boxing up things that reminded me of Laura, stashing them away in the garage where I wouldn't have to look at them. My daughter, thankfully, seemed to bounce back faster than I did. She was young, and while I knew this would leave its mark, she adapted quickly to the changes. I kept things as normal as I could for her, focusing on routines, bedtime stories, and little traditions that would give her a sense of stability. She'd ask about her mom now and then, and I'd explain things as gently as possible, saying only that her mom had made some bad choices and needed to be away for a while. Despite the support from friends and family, loneliness hit hard. The betrayal left scars that ran deep, scars I couldn't see but felt with every quiet moment. I'd lie awake at night, replaying conversations, wondering how I hadn't seen it coming, how I could have misjudged Laura so completely. The thought of trusting anyone else again felt impossible, like opening myself up to that kind of pain was out of the question. I started therapy, which helped more than I'd expected. It was a relief to unload everything, to talk about the anger and sadness without feeling judged or needing to filter my words. I talked about Laura's betrayal, Eric's role, the plans they'd made to hurt me, and the rage that still simmered under the surface. The therapist helped me begin to let go of that anger, to see that my life wasn't defined by their actions but by how I chose to move forward. Slowly, I began to find pieces of myself again, to reconnect with the parts of my life that were untouched by the betrayal. I started focusing more on my daughter's future, her happiness, and how I could rebuild a life for the two of us, one where we could feel safe and hopeful. Months passed, and gradually, life took on a new rhythm. My daughter was my anchor, pulling me back to the present whenever I felt myself slipping into dark thoughts. She was growing, thriving in school, and still passionate about singing. I poured my energy into supporting her dreams, helping her find a new vocal coach, and encouraging her every step of the way. My daughter's laughter filled the house again, a reminder that joy could still exist here, even in the wake of everything we'd lost. Little by little, I stopped associating each room with memories of Laura's betrayal. Instead, I let new memories form. Weekend breakfasts, movie nights, spontaneous dance parties in the living room. I was learning how to be happy again, not just for her, but for myself. I reconnected with old friends, people I hadn't seen in ages because I'd been too wrapped up in work and family life. They welcomed me back, helping me rediscover the parts of myself that I'd lost along the way. I started going to the gym, picking up hobbies I'd abandoned, and even joined a local hiking group. The small steps I took outside my comfort zone helped me reclaim a sense of identity that had been buried under years of routine and obligation. There were still hard days where the weight of what happened bore down on me, but they became less frequent. Therapy continued to help, especially when it came to trusting others again. I was learning that I didn't have to shut myself off from the world out of fear, that I could find healthy boundaries and still connect with people. For the first time in a long time, I felt a spark of hope. Hope that my life could be rebuilt, that love and trust could be possible again someday. The fear wasn't gone entirely, but it was manageable. I was ready to live again, to let go of the bitterness and embrace the life I was creating with my daughter. With each passing day, I felt more grounded, more certain that I could create a life worth living. The past, with all its heartache and betrayal, would always be a part of me, but it didn't have to define me. I had a future waiting, a second chance to find meaning and joy, and I wasn't going to let Laura and Eric's actions take that from me. One Saturday morning, as my daughter and I sat at the kitchen table, painting and laughing over her latest masterpiece, she looked up at me with a smile that was both innocent and wise beyond her years. "Daddy," she said, "are you happy now?" I paused, taking in her question, feeling the warmth of the morning light streaming in through the window, and truly thinking about my answer. I realized that for the first time in what felt like forever, I wasn't just surviving, I was living. My heart still held scars, but it also held gratitude for this new beginning, this chance to be the kind of father and man I'd always hoped to be. "Yes, sweetheart," I said, pulling her into a hug. "I think I am." In that moment, I knew we were going to be okay. Life wasn't perfect, but it was ours to shape, and together, we'd create something beautiful out of the ruins. My daughter's future was bright, and so was mine. I was ready to step forward, leaving the shadows of betrayal behind, and embracing whatever life had in store for us next. Our new chapter had begun, and for the first time, I felt nothing but hope.